I keep a Commonplace book, a digital Commonplace book. Here it is. You're either reading something on the internet or you're reading a book, physical book, and there's always a good copy on the internet to copy and paste. There's something very tiresome for me about copying out longhand passages from a book that I want to preserve some way. This is just a lot easier. I've been doing it for about a year and a half. And if nothing else, it's a record of what you read or tried to read or sort of read for a period of time, at least what you thought in your reading notable enough to copy down, to copy and paste down. This is from the end of March this year to, I guess, yesterday. Actually, after I'm done with one, I print it out at Staples very cheaply, and it's something. At least it's a record of what you're reading. I guess I was reading Shaftesbury's Characteristics. I have a really nice copy from the 18th century, which I dip into here and there. This is from the Letter Concerning Enthusiasm. And then just a Wikipedia article on what civil society is, because it seemed really important, especially in our own country, but around the world. That's exactly what's being destroyed. Longfellow's A Psalm of Life. I don't know if it's a great poem, but it was quoted by Frederick Douglass in What to the Slave is the 4th of July. Um, I don't know which part of it was quoted by Douglass, but that's why I found it. I was reading that with my students at Temple. And then I actually read Henry James's The Tragic Muse. I found a really good copy of the title page in Rosemont, 2-volume edition of The Tragic Muse, and I read it, and it was wonderful. And there's a lot, you'll see, a lot of quotes from that book, things that I wanted to remember. A lot of it about Gabriel Nash, that wonderful character but it is in the margins of the book. He's not a major character, but he is a major character. The aesthete. I mean, he's the Oscar Wilde character. He's the one who's chosen himself and chosen beauty over ethics or moral principle as the guiding thing of his life. And of course, the irony is that he's probably the most moral person in a book of very moral people. He's maybe the most moral. Thinking about Thomas Aikens, more from Tragic Muse, plenty of that. This is a quote from the old French actress. Again, maybe there's one theme in James, and it's funny having read the pattern in the carpet. Is it called Figure in the Carpet? There may be a figure in the carpet for James, and this perpetual treatment of the opposition between a kind of a traditional English American, especially American notion of morality as opposed to a continental way of seeing the world more aesthetically. It's everywhere in James. It's everywhere, and that's I think the main interest of the Tragic Muse. People trying to balance their aesthetic devotion to some art or another with their inherited sense of morality. Great painting of a reading room. One of the characters in The Tragic Muse, a woman who, sort of in poverty with her daughter, goes from European city to European city, spends a lot of time in or borrows books from the private reading rooms that she finds, reads them actually in cafes. I just thought that was interesting. The 19th century, I suppose, phenomenon for people who wanted to read and didn't have a lot of money, could read newspapers and take out novels. Then, yes, I was reading, this is from Ortega, Gold of the Masses. Also read that with my students, particular class, Temple. It's a very, very important book for me right now. There's the original publication. I just want to get the first page of it, of the Tragic Muse and the serialization in the Atlantic Monthly. Sometimes it's quite interesting to compare if you're focusing on a particular passage and you're going back and forth between different editions, the online edition, which may be the original, this is the absolute original, as opposed to the published novel, as opposed to the New York edition. You it's always interesting. Now that we have the internet, we can easily compare these things. It's amazing. I was reading Jacob Burckhardt, not very seriously, but very interesting stuff about history. Had to get that. Keynes. I mean, if you're reading Ortega and Oscar Wilde and things like that, you end up reading Keynes too. And there's the printer's mark, I would call it, of Situation. I got a really nice edition, early edition, first edition, not first impression or first issue of Forster's The Celestial Omnibus. There he is. I was reading Du Bois with my students in that same class, and I definitely wanted to remind myself of, later in life, took a little tour of, once you could get out of the country, I guess, being hounded by the FBI. Met Mao. I mean, you got to have the picture of Mao and Du Bois laughing together. Whatever you think of it. When Mohanty died, J.N. Mohanty at Temple, tried to find a picture of him. I know I had messed up. I thought he marched with, as a young man, with Gandhi, but he didn't. It was with this fellow here a little later. Still reading The Tragic Muse. It takes you about a month. It takes me, I should say, about a month to read one of the larger Henry James novels. It's filled with French, by the way. I don't know if, some authors, maybe not 19th century authors, more 18th century authors earlier, are filled with Latin. It is not true of James. I don't think James really knew Latin, but he certainly knew French. And The Tragic Muse is filled with just expressions of French. It's not like reading War and Peace. Apparently, whole sections of it were in French. Yes, Sarah Siddons, The Tragic Muse. This is the Joshua Reynolds painting of the great actress at the time. I guess it's kind of why the thing was an expression in circulation. Reading Forster, tried to read a little William James. Always trying to pick up the Latin. William James. Started reading De Profundis. I'm actually going to read it with my students in a class at Temple in the fall. I don't know. It's a little grueling. It's more than a little grueling, De Profundis, but it's what I'm going to read with them. It was only in the mire that we met. He's talking about his relationship with Alfred Douglas. Boy, does he take him to task. I don't know. I mean, the interesting thing about De Profundis is that there's several different versions of it. The manuscript, Wilde, of course, wrote while he was in Reading jail, and he just gave it. He was given the manuscript. He was allowed to write it one page at a time, and every time he would fill up a page of this special prison stationery, he would give it to his jailer and be kept. And he'd be given another page, and I don't know when he figured he was done, but he was not allowed to, have the whole manuscript and edit it. It was all in the possession of the warden, I guess. And he was given the manuscript when he left, when his sentence was over, and he apparently immediately gave it to, I forget the name of his good friend. who published it, but published it with I don't know how many excisions, but the whole first part of it, which is just one long addressed complaint to Alfred Douglas, is pretty much gone. And frankly, I think that's the edition that I'm going to read with my students because it's just too. It's not worth. It wouldn't be worth it to them to read the first part. So we're actually going to read the expurgated edition. I think it's better. I think I've copied out Sassoon's The Grandeur of Ghosts many times. Just I mean, I one time I had it memorized. It's maybe one of my favorite poems because it's about the classics. It's about having certain authors in your life that are so important that they are your, as he calls, your deathless friends who guide you when you stumble. And when people talk shit about them, you just sort of don't say anything. To defend them would be beside the point. You just sort of be silent and then realize that your deathless friends have been mistreated. We all have them. I mean, maybe James is one of mine now. Plato, I don't know. Wittgenstein, Borges. You have these people who you need. I had this ambition to read Leviathan this summer and to start with Leviathan and then read Locke's essay and Berkeley and Hume, most of which I've read before, but not as a grown up, really. Pretty amazing, the Pogson Smith introductory essay to the edition I have. The Exequy, I forget the name of the author, it was a very famous poem on the death of his wife. It comes up in Huxley's Eyeless in Gaza, which I read about half of. And then I don't know about Huxley. I love Huxley, but I'm not sure that all of his novels are actually good. And then I started reading a book about Acton, which was an amazing book. Just a little introductory book from like the 80s, the series called Historians on Historians or something. And started looking more into Acton, and it's really wonderful. And these are the Charles Oman is a contemporary, younger contemporary of Acton. Seeley was, I think, the person just before who was the chair of the Cambridge History Department when Acton showed up. And I've always loved this. This is Acton's, I guess, his inaugural lecture, where he talks about the fact that he couldn't get into Cambridge 45 years before, because he was Catholic. And by 1895 or so, whenever it was, he could actually be a lecturer at Cambridge. Things had changed. Amazing quote from Acton about civilization. So good. R.W. Chapman. I mean, going back to continually to that book, Portrait of a Scholar, which I found quite by chance in a thrift store for $5. Boy, did that pay off. Moses Pollock, yeah, that was Moses Pollock, incredibly important bookseller in Philadelphia in the 19th century, and he was Rosenbach's uncle, and in many ways, I would say more important than Rosenbach. Rosenbach was, probably of his time, he was certainly the most important book dealer in the world, the English-speaking world, at least. I don't know. But Moses Pollock was a pioneer bookseller, and this is about the 1904, I don't know, from the New York Times. Amazing what you can find these days. The auction of his stock. Amazing thing about booksellers' clerks there. But yeah, I'm a bibliophile. And then I started reading Henry Adams, Education of Henry Adams, which is obviously a book you should read. But I mean, it's a wonderful book, and but it's not as good as I thought it was. That is, I mean, if you're reading James or Acton or somebody, and then you read Henry Adams, you realize he's not at the fore. He's not in the first level of English prose stylists. He's just not. Though it's a really wonderful book in many ways. How do you find these things? 40 years among the old booksellers of Philadelphia. You find it online. Because if you really like to read and you're a bibliophile and you have interests, you read books online. How could you resist? You're not going to find a copy of 40 Years Among the Old Booksellers of Philadelphia, although I do know where there's a copy. There's a copy in Rosemont at McManus Rare Books, and it's like $300. So I'm not going to get it, but I can read it online, and it's pretty wonderful about just the Philadelphia antiquarian book world of the second half of the 19th century. Where are you going to get that? I don't know why. Then you can read Samuel Pennypacker, the great Philadelphian. Forster on James. Started reading Balzac. That's the painting that's on the Penguin Classic. I forget exactly. It's a German painter, Eugenie Grandet. Balzac, I'm trying to read Balzac, uh, mostly because James said he was the father of us all. I liked it, Eugenie Grandet. It can sometimes be difficult reading things in translation, but it's worth it. I mean, what else am I going to do to learn French? Yeah, this was great. What's in yellow there, the running fire of jeers and jibes, that appears in Eugenie Grandet. And it's like that was this. I couldn't figure out what Balzac was getting at in the passage, and then I googled that. It appears in Balzac in the Penguin translation, and I did an exact phrase match search in Google, and it came up. This is from Fraser, you know, Golden Bough Fraser, in his book where he translated Pausanias, the Greek geographer's description of Greece, and then did 5 volumes of commentary on it. And there it was. It's the practice at Eleusis, I don't know how to pronounce it, when the pilgrims would come, basically tourists would come. It was apparently traditional for the locals to jeer at them when they passed over a bridge, a particular bridge in the town. And it wasn't in bad, faith. There wasn't no malice there. And Fraser actually suggests that verbal abuse can bring good luck, which is wonderful. Uh, yeah, I try to get a copy of that, Pausanias' description of Greece, translated in with a commentary by J.G. Fraser. You're not going to get it. You'll either get some ugly. I mean, you'll get a printout of the PDF that's on Google Books, or you can just read it online for free. So read it online for free, and that got me looking at. Sorry, just the preface to the Golden Bough. Yeah, reading more. Yeah, going through Henry Adams, Education of Henry Adams. The Union was a sentiment, but not much more. Obviously, talking about secession, the Civil War. Eugenie Grandet. Yeah, and then a friend of mine suggested Lady Barbarina, which is a wonderful story by Henry James. I mean, Henry James, reading a Henry James novel, a longer novel like A Tragic Muse, you have to be dedicated. Reading the Golden Bowl, or Portrait of a Lady, you have to be a James fan. But no one has to be a James fan to read Lady Barbarina or The Figure in the Carpet, which is the other story that was suggested to me. I mean, they're just pure joy. Anyone could read them, and they're just wonderful. I was looking at Guthrie's Socrates. Yeah, this is incredible. John Milton's son. I think it was referenced I was reading something by Leslie Stephen about Cambridge in the 1860s. And that line, owls and cuckoos, asses, apes, and dogs, too. Describe Milton is describing his critics. Apparently, he wrote an essay um, defending the practice of divorce, and he was attacked by it, attacked for it, and that's how he characterizes his critics: owls and cuckoos, asses, apes, and dogs. I don't know if I'd ever be able to memorize the whole thing, but that line pretty useful. Yeah, I mean, it's worthwhile reading things, if only for the references. That also comes from Leslie Stephen. That you can track these things down with the internet now. It's amazing. The dandy, his friend says he's going to the House of Commons, and the dandy says, "What does that go on still?" It's just great. Yeah, sketches from Cambridge. Yeah, Pullman or Pullman comes from hoi polloi. The many Pullmen were the mass of students, the majority of students at Cambridge who were not trying to get honors. They were just trying to graduate like normal people, and they were called Pullmen, hoi polloi, as opposed to they don't call them Pol oligoi, but hoi oligoi. But the few, the elite, who want to score highly on the Tripos exam. Yeah, Leslie Stephen. Leslie Stephen's interesting, and you know the misfortune of being Virginia Woolf's father. So that's what you always have to say about Leslie. Oh, wasn't he Virginia Woolf? Yeah, okay. But he was important in his own right. More from Ortega. What was that? Can you remember what that is? Oh, it's from Leslie Stephen again. It's just quotes about books and libraries that Leslie Stephen used to be the, I don't know, the epigraph of his hours in a library. Boy, it's really great. Well, granted, so you get in this Google sort of rabbit hole. I was uh, Googling the grandeur of ghosts, Sassoon, and came up with a review of Toulmin and Goodfield's The Fabric of the Heavens in the New Science. Science is worth getting. And then this was interesting. This is good. This was good. We're being reminded of what I thought was interesting in Ernst Mach's analysis of the sensations. Is that what it's called? Yeah. Pretty amazing thing about personhood and the ego and the multiple deaths of the ego or the person that happen in a human lifetime because we forget. Very right. I mean, that's good for the philosophy of death things I'm going. The Senex Eratus. I was looking at Rochester when I was in New York last weekend because we're getting to the end of this. And somehow, I don't know, it's a long story actually how you get to Senex Eratus. You start with reading Hawthorne, and he uses the euphemism the virgin zone to describe anatomically a woman's genitals. And then, of course, you Google virgin zone, and that leads you to two places. One, Hawthorne's Rappaccini's daughter, and two, a poem by Rochester, John Wilmot, infamous Earl of Rochester, favorite of Charles II, and infamous libertine, dirty poem that he wrote about a woman having a sexual fantasy. But then that leads to this, I don't know, reading about that, the Senex Eratus, the irate old man, the angry old man who was a stock character in comedy at one time, I guess. And then, yes, I mean, what a wonderful discovery. Rochester's Upon Nothing, which is a great philosophical poem, as far as I'm concerned. And that's it. That's my digital commonplace book for the past few months.